I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. Please be seated. This may be out of something I shouldn't do, but the moment of silence was in part for a gentleman we lost this week, and that was our county executive, Paul Farrell. So, thank you, everyone. Could I have roll call, Jessica, please?
Commissioner Liebert.
Here.
Commissioner Hoff.
Here.
Commissioner Belt.
Here.
Trustee Rhodey.
Here.
President Knutson.
Here.
Commissioner Grabowski and Commissioner Jurasik excused.
Okay. Public hearing, number 2, item number 2. Conditional use grant request by Frank's Catering LLC for temporary food concession sales. This request is located 733 West Wisconsin Avenue, PWV 0894997. This 2.629 acre property is zone B1. Community Business District. Property owner is Scott Schaefer and applicant is Frank's Catering LLC. Scott Klopp.
It's actually Steve Klopp.
It's actually Steve Klopp?
It's Steve Klopp, yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Is there anyone here, whoops, I will open up the public hearing. Is there anybody here that would like to speak on that topic?
I'm assuming that address is Nips.
Yes, that's the one by Nips.
That's all.
Huh?
I just have a question.
Oh, okay. Did you need to say anything more or just? Okay. I will close the public hearing and go for citizens' comments. This is an opportunity for citizens to share their opinions with commission members on any topic they choose. However, due to Wisconsin open meeting laws, the commission is not able to answer questions or respond to your comments. All comments should be directed to the commission. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per speaker. Speakers are asked to please use the podium and state their name and address. Is there anybody here that would like to make a comment at this time on anything? Okay, then we're going to go to item number 4, approval of the minutes. Approval of the Planning Commission meeting May 14th, 2026. Did somebody want to explain? Yes, Matt.
Yes, President Knudsen. So the minutes are actually correct as they were originally approved at the June Plan Commission meeting. However, on the agenda for the June meeting, they were listed on the agenda as the May 12th meeting minutes. So in order to correct that, they're before you again with the appropriate date, which is May 14th.
Okay. Would someone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the May 14th, 2026 Planning Commission meeting minutes.
Liebert, second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Meetings are hereby adopted. Item B, Planning Commission meeting June 11th, 2026 minutes. I will look for a motion to approve as presented unless there are questions, comments, or corrections as to the way they are presented. Someone like to make a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the June 11th, 2026 minutes as written.
Second. Hoff.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are hereby adopted for June 11, 2026. Old business, we have none. New business, review, discussion, and possible action on conditional use grant request by Frank's Catering LLC for temporary food concession sales. This request is located at 733 West Wisconsin Avenue, PWV 0894997. This 2.629 acre property is Zone B1, Community Business District. Property owner is Scott Schaefer and applicant is Frank's Catering LLC, Steve Klopp. I will ask ask the board, are there any questions or comments as is the way it is presented this evening? Does anybody have any objection or anything?
I guess if I can
Yes.
just make a
Sure.
couple quick comments. First of all, I know this person, I know this family, I know this business that they started right after his retirement. It's a great business, and it's at Nettie's Irish Pub. They do a great job 1 day a week. The one thing I do want to comment about is the fact that this even had to come before us in this form. I guess my concern is we treat every situation like it is a 3-story building on the lakefront or a development or a subdivision. This was a 10 by 10 tent being put up, okay? We've made some changes to ordinance that made sense when it came to side yards and sheds on cement. You know, this is something that's screaming for better government, to make more sense where, you know, we shouldn't treat everything as if it's going to be a big development. You know, there are situations where you don't need to have 3 weeks lead time. You know, just something as we go into improving our ordinance and becoming better government, we should look at that also. Also, when we're looking at this situation, it seems like there's a common sense way of treating this differently than you would a building again. It's a one day a week, 3.5 hours, had to go through a lot of work and cost in order to get this in front of us, and was it really an important move? I'm not faulting anybody in staff. They're following our ordinance. Okay, I'm not faulting that at all. I question the common sense of the ordinance that forces this to take place.
Are there any other comments or questions? Do I have a motion then?
Make a motion to approve the conditional use grant requested by Frank's Catering.
Second. Hoff?
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion or comments? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is hereby adopted. Review, discussion, and possible action on sign plan request by Four Seasons WI LLC for a golf simulator business. This request is located at 1405 Capitol Drive, PWV 0901819840002, is Zone B1 Community Business District with a planned development overlay. Property owner is Chestnut Limit Partnership and applicant is Four Seasons LLC. I will ask the board again, are there any questions or comments as it relates to this particular item?
Remind me, this just wasn't on, like, it wasn't on their request from last month, so we couldn't
No,
approve it,
so
right?
the plan unit development that overlays that area specifically says all signs have to go to plan commission. So the only reason it's here in front of you today is because the PUD says it has to.
But we,
It
like,
complies with your ordinance.
we approved some stuff for this,
We did the business plan, the plan of operation.
and it, could they have
If they-
requested the sign?
If they had had it ready in time, we would have put
Okay.
it all together. There was
Just
a little
wanted to make
delay
sure.
in getting it.
Yep,
We did have it ready. We didn't want to muck anything up.
Ah,
We
okay.
had one thing denied, the other thing-
got it. We're good.
The zoning was the big issue.
Perfect.
Okay.
Understood.
So it could have, but we're here today.
I will ask again, is there any way that this could have been handled? I know a PUD, this has to go through because of a PUD. Is there any way that it can be changed by us?
No, you'd have to change the plan unit development ordinance, so that would have to come from either a plan commission initiation, recommendation to the village board, or the board would have to refer something here to go back to there. So you're looking at an ordinance change, it's not something that this commission can waive or otherwise do away with.
Okay, but this is something we could look at and have staff approve if it meets the criteria of a normal sign,
No,
no?
no, signs in the PUD for Meadow Creek all have to come here.
Okay.
This is different than like the Ryan Street property where we've had them come here. The administrative exception that you put into your code, that would apply there. There's no PUD there that says it has to come here. You have an ordinance here that trumps anything else. That's why this property is coming here.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments?
I'll can I make a motion to approve the sign request for Four Seasons Wisconsin LLC for the property located at 1405 Capitol Drive, units B through E, subject to the conditions presented in the packet by staff.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion is hereby carried. Review, discussion, and possible recommendation to the village board on an ordinance amending section 40.108B of the municipal code of the village of Pewaukee, and a definition for building width. Is there any questions or comments as it relates to this particular ordinance amendment? Does everybody understand what we're doing? Then I will look for a motion to forward this to the village board, make the change.
I'll make a motion to push this forward to the village board to make the change in the definition of building width with the recommendations of staff.
Second, Liebert.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion or comments? If not, all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion is hereby carried. Next item is review and discussion of possible action to the village board on an ordinance amending section 40.35A of the municipal code of the village of Pewaukee, standard specification for access drives. Again, does everybody understand? Are there any questions or comments as it relates to that? Yes, Bob.
Just one question when it comes to access drives. Again, this is not something that's going to be implemented unless they are being reconstructed or constructed, correct? I mean, we're not gonna go out there and look at current access drives that might not meet, okay.
No, this is for projects that come forward.
Okay.
Currently, we have a gap in our code where our code says that streets, yes, should be built to the standards and specs that DPW has, that Director Beagle has. But it says access drives in the title, but it doesn't say that anywhere in the body of the ordinance. So it's ambiguous as to whether the standard specs should apply to driveways. Staff has wrestled with this recently with a couple of applications that have come through, so we want to clean it up to say, yes, we have standard specs for driveways. They should be applicable to new projects or reconstruction.
Any questions or comments? Does somebody like to make a motion to move this to the village board?
I'd like to make a motion to move the amended section of 40.435, streets and access drives changes to the village board with our endorsement.
Liebert, second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is hereby carried. Review discussion regarding Wisconsin Act 68 and 173. Guess we have a sideshow here on this?
Yeah, so get to listen to me for a little while now. There are two legislative changes that occurred in 2025 that staff felt it was important to update Plan Commission on, just so you're at least aware of some of the stuff going on and how it may impact village ordinances. Those are Act 68, which largely impacts how subdivision development is done, and then Act 173, which is related to comprehensive plans. I'm going to go through some of the highlights of both of them with you tonight, and then give you just some takeaways of how they affect the village. The first one is Act 68. It is a number of changes specifically related to how planning works. and the processes going through it. The changes can be significant. However, in the village's case, they are relatively not impactful. The code in the villages are actually set up pretty well to handle most of these changes. And they did go into effect in July 1 of 2026. So these changes are now in effect under state statute. A number of the sections of 236, which is the plating law, changed as a result of this act. The first piece of that is that now pre-submissions have to be an option within your code. Many municipalities did not allow for pre-submittal application meetings. Village's code actually already handles it. The actual statutory change says it can be handled by governing body, plan commission, staff. You have some discretion. Village already allows staff to handle those meetings, so there's no need to change anything. It's already handled appropriate through the village code. Second, it starts to get into what is the requirements of a preliminary plat. There were places throughout the state of Wisconsin where people were treating preliminary plats as almost the equivalent of a final plat. They were requiring near final construction grade drawings and engineered documents for a preliminary plat. What this act said, and this change specific to 236.11.1D, was said, nope, preliminary plat is just that, it is preliminary. All the plans can be marked preliminary. They do not have to be construction grade. They can be preliminary, and you cannot reject that preliminary plat for it only having preliminary documents with it. It further went on to talk about conditions of approval and what a municipality may do when implying conditions within a preliminary plat. These are largely changes that affect staff level review and how the staff handles these. They're not changes that impact how plan commission is going to interact or village board is going to interact with the process. It's really how staff goes through the review process with applicants, how they can condition those approvals and what those approvals look like. Again, historically, municipalities have kind of held approvals till some improvements were in. And what this change said is, nope, during a preliminary plat, you can't be requiring that improvements be put in and dedicated during the preliminary plat process because it is a preliminary plat. It did not necessarily change how you can do developers agreements, which is really where most of the teeth comes into play in subdivision development. It's your developers agreement that starts to outline timelines, requirements, who's responsible for what. There were municipalities that were kind of treating the preliminary plat as almost like a soft developer's agreement. And this is saying, no, the plat is the plat, the developer's agreement is what it is, and those are handled separately. So again, it's more of staff level now with the developer's agreement and making sure the plat just follows the platting guidelines. It then gets into talking about substantial completion and when permits and lots are allowed to be sold. The way the current changes read is once a development is substantially completed. Now, this act itself does not define substantial completion. That was actually done a couple of years ago under a different set of legislation. But it essentially says once substantial completion is completed, you have to start issuing your building permits and things like that, even before you maybe accept the final improvements as part of the subdivision plat. Again, this is further information. This comes from the previous law, which basically says what is substantial completion. It's about 90% of the work being completed by cost. That is how substantial completion was previously defined. And then it references back into this legislation. The final piece that, again, this is more on staff for making sure it is followed, but it does kind of tighten up the timeline between when final plats are approved and how long the village has to sign the plat. Again, nothing that was an issue for staff previously, but it does start to tighten up, making sure that the platting process is done in a timely fashion. It did specifically enumerate that lots can be sold before final improvements have begun, which previously many municipalities wanted all improvements put in and dedicated back to them before they would allow you to sell lots. This act specifically says that is no longer the case. Lots can start to be sold within a subdivision before final improvements and dedication have been completed. And then finally, as I mentioned, it did put in a 10-day kind of time frame that once all criteria for a final plat have been completed and it's submitted to the village only has 10 days to complete it. Really, what I want to enumerate here is the key takeaway from Act 68 is primary compliance responsibilities of your village staff. How you interact with the plating process is going to be very minimal changes based on what this act did. It was really just tightening up and making sure all municipalities were following a similar process throughout the state, taking out some of the gray area.
Question.
Yep.
If we have to give them property rights to start selling parcels or building before everything is in, like stormwater management and all that, and there is damage to other areas outside of that plat, who pays for that?
So that would still be whatever your village code prescribes and whatever your developer's agreement. What this change does is it really says you really got to make sure you have a good, strong developer's agreement that goes along with that subdivision development that can enumerate things like that.
So
Okay.
that liability piece, like Mark said, that you'd find that we provide for that in all of our developers' agreements, what happens in those scenarios. There's also potential code comes in if there are, stormwater issues impacting a neighboring property, our code would fill in that gap as well. So this change that Mark just went through is not really going to impact that scenario. We still have tools to deal with that.
Yeah, I would say the biggest takeaway from Act 68 is separating out developers' agreement issues from platting process issues.
And to Mark's points, how the village has traditionally handled developers' agreements and plats, how we've done it in the past, now every development is different, but from a large, big picture standpoint, I don't think it's gonna impact the village in the way we do business.
I've taken a look at your land division code and 236, and there's many municipalities as a result of this are having to update their land division codes. The village does not need to. Based on its code, its current wording, and how it largely uses references back to 236 to dictate the process, there are no changes necessary to your subdivision code based on this change. That tells you the village is already in a pretty good place.
So if we're referencing state statute, as it changes, we change with it, right?
Exactly. All right, moving on to Act 173. This one is the newer of the two. We started to touch on this a little bit last month when we were talking about multifamily development. This is sometimes you'll hear it referred to as the truth in planning law. It's the concept that largely says if somebody's applying for something and it meets your comp plan, it's starting to lock you in and make it much harder for you to deny decisions that are consistent with your comprehensive plan. This one I am going to have some recommendations for you to go through as things that we may want to look at and updating the comp plan to make sure you're in, the best shape possible before this goes into effect. This does not go into effect till January 1, 2028. So we have, nearly a year and a half to update any changes if necessary. Many of the planning elements that 173 touches on have already been in the comprehensive plan along. They're not new. What it's doing is kind of re-emphasizing and putting some practical importance on things that were already in the comp plan law. So getting started, generally what a lot of municipalities had done in their comprehensive plan was had very broad housing and population estimates. Maybe you looked at 30 years out. That may no longer work based on X 173. What you may ultimately end up wanting to do is have 5-year increments of what your population and your growth looks like, because as we get into a little further here, it starts to talk about, if you say you have only a 20-year projection, but somebody comes in and they want to develop an area. This, again, I'm going to kind of back up and say, although there are changes we need to make to the comp plan based on this, the village has not a ton of residential developable property remaining. So the actual area you have is relatively minor. But an example of why this is important is, say you were a municipality or a village that had a lot of developable area and somebody wanted to skip over a vacant parcel and develop the next one, and you tried to deny it and say, well, no, that really shouldn't develop till this does. Well, if your projections are just broad, you're not going to be able to deny it as it leapfrogs. Now, if you had 5 or 10 or 15-year projections and you said, well, this is the area in the 5 years, this is 10, this is 15, you could have utilized that to potentially deny that change. So that is why shorter time frame projections can be more beneficial based on this change. So mapping of future land uses really needs to be looked at again. If you have just large swaths that you were mapping as one thing and somebody wants to develop again anywhere in that area, if you don't specify timelines and zones within that area, the larger you have, the more you would be opening yourself up for, again, that spotty development potential and not maybe orderly growth of undeveloped areas. This is, again, where it talks a little bit about that idea of early development, late-term growth areas, and making sure you have development in an orderly fashion. So Act 173 also kind of updates the role of the future land use map as a controlling document. So you want to make sure your future land use map has more information than was traditionally done within them. So again, your future land use map should consider some of these things, phasing or staggered developments. And again, given the village's limited potential, that one may not make sense because there's just not a lot out there. But again, if it was, you'd be looking at short and near-term development, using utility mapping. If you were extending utilities out to an area, making sure your utility infrastructure maps within your comprehensive plan match that same development time frame. That as your utilities get extended, maybe those are the next developable areas. Density kind of matters more than ever. I would say the biggest takeaway from how this got redefined in the code is if you had someone come in and say your code said medium density residential is 8 to 12 units per acre. A multifamily developer came in and proposed it at 12 units per acre, and you tried to deny it saying, well, we really wanted more like 8 than 12. No, if they come in and it meets your density thresholds, you would largely be locked into having to approve it if it met your categories. So one of the recommendations of Act 173 is if you have those broad categories, it might be time to tighten them up. Make smaller ranges that you are actually comfortable with instead of broader ranges, because you can only rely on what's going to be in that comprehensive plan as you make those decisions. So, like I said, this talks a little bit about, and almost all of this is really targeting housing, almost specifically multifamily housing is really what, go ahead, President.
So basically, if we have an area zoned for business or some other type of, and a developer comes in and says, well, I'm gonna put some multifamily housing there, I need you to rezone that. They can force us?
No. So what this does is this is the comprehensive plan. If it is business, say it's a B1 zone today, and your comp plan says multifamily residential is the appropriate use there, and they ask to zone it to that multifamily within that density range of what your comp plan calls for, you would largely be not able to deny that zone change. Now, if your comp plan says business, and it's business, and they want to zone to multifamily, it doesn't meet the comp plan says business, so you don't have to approve that zone change. But if your comp plan says it's an area for residential within whatever densities you describe, and somebody wants to zone to that, that is where this kicks in and says, you've said this is an appropriate land use in your comp plan, you now need to approve the zone change to allow it.
Okay.
So what it does have is this extra 180 day if you don't have densities in this January 1 of 2028 timeframe passes. There's still a caveat in there to give municipalities 180 days to update and fix their comp plan if they need to.
One more question.
Yep.
How do they come up with the act that says you are gonna have this many people in the community in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, so you need to do this? When, like, we have a lot of multifamily now.
Mm-hmm.
We're saturated. The city, not so much. Maybe Lannon, Lisbon, not so much. But we have some open areas. How can they dictate, or do they dictate saying that this area is growing so you have to?
Nope, that's not what this says at all. This doesn't say you have to have areas or you have to grow by so much. What it's saying is because all comp plans are required to have population and growth estimates. That's one of the elements required of any comprehensive plan under state law. What this change is saying is if you have these growth projections, these growth areas, and you've already identified them as residential, and somebody proposes residential development in that area, if those things match, you have to approve them. It doesn't say you have to go in and you have to say, they're not going to dictate and say you have to add 5,000 units per your village. Nope, that's not what this does at all. This just says your comp plan is already a base requirement, has population and growth estimates, and if somebody wants to then do what you've already said you have or you need, you can't deny it.
Kind of holding everybody to their comp plan.
That's why they call it kind of truth in planning. You've planned it, you've done the comp plan. Now, if a developer wants to do it,
You said you wanted
you
this.
said it.
I'm doing it.
Yeah,
And now you're saying
that
you
is,
can't.
in the essence, that is exactly what it is.
So if we don't have, in our comp plan, we don't, let's say our population is 8,000, and in our comp plan, it said we're gonna go to 9,000, we could stay at 9,000.
You could stay at 8,000 if you don't have the need or the development. Population projections are only that. It was projecting based on when when the plan was done and what it thought development may look like and growth may look like.
Okay.
You have to look at your land use areas. I mean, you think about the areas the village has that are undeveloped. It is almost all R1 ag overlay zoning. So you don't even have really a lot of medium, high density area that's undeveloped in your community right now.
Okay.
So this is kind of the example I talked about a little bit earlier. You know, if your plan said 4 to 12 units, somebody proposes 12 units, you can't deny it and say you're denying it because of 12 units. That's where these density ranges, if used, need to be reevaluated and potentially shrunk down to what you're actually looking for. Maybe it should be 4 to 6, 4 to 8, something of that nature.
Does it have to be a range? Could you do up to? Or do they like to have a range?
They're typically done as ranges. Even up to is still a range. It's just worded a little bit differently.
You don't want to be ambiguous, right?
You do not want to, you need to be as specific as possible, and we'll actually get the next couple of slides to talk about that. Really, one of the keys to this change is being specific. The more specific you are, the more control you're going to have, because if somebody wouldn't meet those specifics, you have the ability to deny it if you don't want. If it's ambiguous and it's that gray area, that's where it really gets hard to deny a project. So, again, similar to the last one thing X73 does is it starts to talk more about development standards and development expectations, lot sizes, setbacks, things that were traditionally only found in zoning codes and almost never touched on in the comprehensive plan. It benefits communities to start to look at matching those type of standards up in their comp plan and their zoning district to give them greater protections of what they're expecting in those developable areas. So if you had half-acre lot requirements or quarter-acre lot requirements, you could add that information into your comp plan, kind of locking in truly, we only want a density of 3 units per acre, and we don't want lots more than a half an acre or less than a quarter of an acre. So you can start to add those type of traditional zoning type standards into a comp plan to further specify and strengthen your comp plan. So again, some of the things we could look at, specifying minimum and typical lot sizes in the comp plan. That way you're matching up the exact type of development you want in that area. Identify types even. You could say, maybe it's multifamily, and maybe you're saying you're okay with 6 to 8 units per acre, but it's 6 to 8 units per acre of no more than 2 stories and of townhomes. So it's not broad multifamily, it's a specific, if we're open to multifamily here, this is exactly what we envision as the multifamily there, giving that specificity. Where the comp plan lacks can't get that word out of my mouth today, specificity.
We know what you mean.
That's where you want to look at adding it so they can't have that broad discretion. Precision and land use categories. Again, one of the things this says is you have to rely on your kind of the way you enumerate and describe your land use categories. So almost every comp plan on your future land use map has all its categories, and it has very broad statements like low density residential, medium density residential, high density residential. You don't want broad. You want to go in and you want to change those descriptions to be exactly what you mean low density residential, under 5 units per acre. Medium density, 5 to 10. Whatever the category is, whatever you're comfortable with, you want to add that description and that specificity. Maybe you say in like medium density, it's no more than 8 units per acre of 2-story townhomes only. So you can add that level of detail into your comprehensive plan to strengthen your position on exactly what kind of development you want. So, kind of the recommendations for how to, it's tightening up those land use descriptions. It's clearly stating what you want. And it's then ensuring that the map and the text match. The text of your comp plan and your future land use map, they both match up with what you need. So one of the things this does is it limits the discretion of zoning classification changes for residential development. This is really targeted at residential. It's making sure that your zoning classifications, your comp plan match, they all match up and they get you to the end goal of what you want with taking that broadness out of it. It further then goes on to say that if a zone change request comes in, you essentially have 90 days to act on it and likely approve it if it matches what your comp plan. If that zone change comes in, it gives you about 90 days to approve it if it matches your comp plan. And that is assuming these type of things are all satisfied as part of the request. The proposed change for the area identifying the comp plan is projected as residential. So they want residential, you've said it's residential, you check that box off. It's in adjacent or close proximity to other developments. As we talked about that little bit of a 180-day thing, if you don't have net density ranges, it gives the municipality a chance to go in and correct that. And the current housing supply of the village does not meet the existing or forecasted housing demand within the next 5 years. So that talks, kind of go back to where we talked about earlier about having those 5, 10, 15-year projections and where's appropriate and what do you need. And then the proposed change is not located with a area that is for exempt agricultural only. The village still has ability to deny requests, and it gets into making sure that things like you don't have public infrastructure there, so they can't request an improvement if services cannot be provided or it's going to prevent a shortage or overburden public facilities. The village can still demonstrate denial if there is significant threat to public health and safety. A lot of those broad kind of planning things you can use to deny stuff. Failures for the village to approve a requested zone change in a timely manner may be grounds for the developer to go to court and not only ask for it to be approved, but also then try to seek reimbursement from the village for their attorney fees of having to take you to court. So, kind of one big last key takeaway. Act 173 does not necessarily change what the village is required to do as a comp plan, but it does change the consequences for it being vague or outdated. You really need to go in and make sure you have a detailed, comprehensive plan that outlines and enumerates exactly what you want. And I'll kind of wrap this up by saying now, I've looked at the villages, you don't have a lot of residential developable area. So there's not huge, broad changes that necessarily need to be made to your comp plan. But my recommendation, there is probably some things that it will benefit you to look at to make sure, when you say low density, which is a lot of what you have, what do you mean by low density? Detached single family homes. Is that what you want when you mean low density? So I think there is some stuff that we could do to strengthen even the minimal development area you have left to make sure you're going to get the development that you want. And then re-looking at, are there areas where multifamily maybe you previously were going to allow it, or you don't want to anymore? areas maybe you are more open to multifamily, because if you're going to get into multifamily considerations, that's really where we got to strengthen your comp plan. If it's largely single family that's left to be developed, the changes aren't too bad, but it's the multifamily where we really would want to take an in-depth look and make sure you're set up for what you want in those areas. Any other questions, Grulinski? Anything
No, I think you summed it up very well.
Thank you, Attorney Grulinski, for helping put this together. I didn't do this on my own. Matt did help me.
But you took the lead in presenting it, which I appreciate. No, I don't have anything to add. I'd say the one takeaway that I would have for this commission on, especially Act 173, is everything Mark just went through with regards to withdrawal of the village's discretion to approve rezoning in certain situations. It is certain situations. But what the legislature did is almost akin to what they did with withdrawing your control over conditional use grants. It's very similar to that. So do not be surprised if someday in the future, if you're still sitting on this commission and a rezone comes in front of you, and myself and Mark or whoever's sitting in our chairs says, well, normally you'd have legislative discretion to deny this, but because of Act 173, you don't. A situation like that could arise in the future if you don't. Be very careful in the way you draft your comp plan.
Is the village part of the League of Municipalities?
We are.
And they still lobby for us? Okay.
Yeah, my understanding when this came forward, it was probably driven by the developers.
Sure.
And their lobbies in Madison, and that the league fought to have provisions removed that were even stronger than the ones we ended up with. So what, from their perspective, is they fought the good fight and ended up with the lesser of the evils.
I mean, I guess, and it's divided government, so Democratic governor signed a Republican bill, so there's a compromise, or I don't know if there are other parts of these bills that were maybe not even related to development, but it was maybe just a larger package of something, but. So it could have been worse, is what you're saying, okay. Thank you.
All right, are there any other questions or comments? If not, thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Mark, would you be able to put that on somehow send it to all the board and commission members?
Yep, I'll get it to Jessica, and she can.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, item F, review, discussion, and possible direction to staff regarding section 40.108B structure. This is a very interesting item. Never really thought of it this, the way it was proposed. So, do we have any questions from the commission? Matt or Mark, do you have any comments you'd like to?
I can give a brief overview. So, some recent questions have come up at the village, and the staff has been taking a look at them. And one of them resulted in kind of taking a closer look at the definition of what a structure is and how it potentially applies to, let's say, improvements that maybe you don't traditionally think of as a structure. A bird feeder, a laundry line, a flagpole, hanging planters. People will take a large pot filled with concrete, put a pole in, and hang flowers and stuff off of it. Well, the way currently structure is defined, if you take a very narrow kind of definition review of the exact wording, it can apply to almost anything. So if you take that extreme reading of it, it does start to potentially create problems of things that maybe shouldn't require permits or zoning permits, maybe do, because of that very strict reading of the definition of structure. What some codes have done to get around this is kind of change the definition of structure, or within the code add in exceptions for things that are maybe more landscape type improvements or minor improvements, to say, okay, we have this definition of structure, which is kind of our catch-all and catches most of the stuff we need, but we recognize things like these aren't intended to be structures, therefore they're exempted out of the ordinance. Right now, the village's code doesn't have any of that type of exemption language, where it just has the definition of structure, and then it's kind of left to staff to go, okay, well, if we take a very narrow read of this, it potentially applies to things none of us want. None of us think you should have to get a zoning or a building permit to put up a bird feeder, right? I mean, that's, but if you take that very strict way it's written, it could apply. So something that Plan Commission could consider is, okay, maybe let's do a little bit of research and come up with language to exempt out some of these things that we probably don't want to be regulating.
Any questions or comments? Is there any way we can write it that a structure may be something that if you can store something in it or prevent weather from destroying something, you know, like a lean-to could be a structure. But if you put a flagpole or a flower pot out there, it's not.
Yeah. So we wouldn't want to define it as being able to put something in things. For example, you still want fences to be structures, because they are a common structure type. So I would think the more common way, and we can follow this up with some research, is to create exemptions. The definition of structure that you have is not out of the ordinary of how most codes define structure. It's that it doesn't then have that exception section to make sure you're not applying it to things that you really don't need to. That doesn't mean we couldn't find a new definition of structure and we rework it to give some greater flexibility. But I think potentially, you know, if Plan Commission is interested in it and the village board is interested in it, what we could do is maybe look at a combination. What are maybe an alternative for the definition of structure, but then maybe what is an exemption we put in to give some flexibility for these things that we don't want to be regulating as structures.
So would an example of that be if we stated that we wanted some metal fencing as a structure to block something off, and then flower pots were used?
So that's where we have to look at what kind of language would be put in the code. If you put it up as a fence, the structure could apply. If then you do it with berming or flower plots, does it not apply? Have you achieved the same thing? That's why the code right now is written the way it is, to try to create or eliminate the ability for people to maybe try to create loopholes. Maybe they make a fence, but they do it out of flower pots or something. They've achieved the same end goal, but now zoning regulations don't apply because it's flower pots and not a, you know, post and board fence. So we have to weigh the pros and cons of how we define things and what are the loopholes that are created versus not created. You know, the current definition tries to eliminate all loopholes by just saying everything's a structure. So there is, you know, even if we add, say, some exemptions, there's probably going to be a situation 10 years from now where we created a loophole we didn't mean to. You know, it'd be looking at taking our best opportunity and trying to come up with something that's reasonable, but fully then understanding as soon as you create an exception, you are going to create some ambiguity there and some loopholes that potentially somebody can find in the future. And it's just weighing if that's worth it.
Is there a way to account for safety when it comes to that?
It's something we could look at. I'm not sure how safety would be defined in that context.
Right. Like I think in a few places that where we've asked for fencing structures for safety, flower pots have been put in place instead of the fencing that was originally requested for. And so my question is how does safety play into structure?
So I would have to look at it off the top of my head. I'm not familiar with anything ever using that, but doesn't mean it's not out there and something we can't find to evaluate.
Thank you.
I would say that might be a different issue if they're not complying with something that's been, if this commission or staff is telling them that a fence needs to be put in for specific reasons, a fence is a certain type of structure. Not every structure is a fence, but every fence is a structure, right?
Right.
So I think that's an entirely different issue than what you're trying to tackle with here, would be my opinion. I guess my opinion is the definition you have right now, to Mark's point, has no loopholes. It gives the village the greatest amount of ability and authority to regulate with this definition. Now, there are pros and cons to that. The con is it's going to catch everything. It's going to catch the bird feeder, the laundry line, the flag poles, all of that. So my recommendation would be leave the definition you have, and the board or the commission should look at, okay, what are common sense things or groups of things that should be exempted out? My fear, if you tinker with this definition too much structurally, you're going to open up more loopholes than you intend. I would rather have a targeted list of, okay, this is our umbrella. These are the 5 or 6 things or groups of things that we exempt out. To me, that makes more sense.
And over time, you could then always amend that list if, it becomes, potentially burdensome to have to amend it for a specific situation that comes up, but it does give the village a little greater protection if you would need to amend it for something that wasn't thought of in 3 years, 4 years down the line. Somebody else had something that's like, okay, you're right. That probably does make sense. Let's go back and change the list.
Right. My fear is if we just either keep this definition or change it, or then also add in an exception which is equally or more so ambiguous, that doesn't help staff, and that doesn't help people that aren't here in this commission, future commissions, tell a resident this is or is not a structure. That doesn't help anybody.
I could actually see somebody down the line, if we take out flagpoles, it doesn't like the neighbor in the back, he just lines them with flagpoles. Says, that's not a structure, even though it's blocking the neighbor. So actually it is a structure, but it's a structure of flagpoles.
Hence why we have the broad definition, so we can prevent situations like that.
As soon as you create an exception, you do create opportunities for people to get creative with it. I mean, think of that same situation. Nope, they put up a laundry line and they just permanently have towels on it. Mm-hmm. They've now created a fence, a visual barrier. It's not a fence, it's a laundry line. And how now what do you do? So, I mean, there is consequences of even making small exceptions.
Sounds like it makes it more like an HOA.
Mm-hmm.
Catch-22.
Well, and the thing is, this definition appears throughout your zoning code. So it's not just setbacks and such. It appears everywhere. All sorts of different regulations for placement of structures and how it relates to primary structures and accessory structures and such. So there's a lot that, even by tinkering with this baseline definition, you're going to impact, even more so than just, somebody putting up a fence 5 feet off of somebody's property. That's the most common, or, a bird feeder 2 feet off their property. That's the most common thing that we're talking about here, but there could be other consequences.
So what are we asking staff to come back with something, or are you looking for us to tell you what should be included or exempted, or what are we kind of looking for here?
I think staff's position is, right now, we're taking in Mark's words, a narrow reading of this, or I guess, is a broad reading, that this is a broad definition. This is going to, as currently written, apply in most situations. So knowing that staff is taking a broad interpretation of the definition in dealing with residents and the different applications they bring forward, knowing that staff is making that broad interpretation, does the commission wish to explore creating some exemptions? I guess that's the direction we're looking for.
So we turn to Galinsky's point. In chapter 40 alone, the word structure is referenced 126 times. So it is broadly used. So there would be, if we mess with the definition of structure, it's going to potentially apply to a lot of different things.
So,
we brought this up, and it says that, you know, based on recently proposed projects that you guys, that staff has had to review. Like, I guess my question is, like, what are these projects that seem like some of them that are coming in that maybe, that you're like, man, this counts as a structure, and now they had to get a permit to put in a flagpole, right? Or like, what's coming to us that seems, that brought this up?
So, we had a resident construct a lean-to attached to their garage. And, the neighbor, complained that was built without a permit. And so staff pursued enforcement that you have to have a permit for that because it qualifies as a structure. And the resident challenged that interpretation, saying, well, are you going after all the bird feeders in the village? Are you going after all the flagpoles in the village? And when we said no, then the question was, are you selectively enforcing this ordinance? If you're not enforcing it on the bird poles and the bird feeders and the flagpoles, why are you deciding to enforce it on me?
Which is not an uncommon refrain from residents, but as they should be aware, and as this commission should be aware, that we are largely a complaint-based enforcement village. We do not go around looking for problems. We respond to complaints that are brought, and that's our enforcement strategy. It always has been.
Okay, but the way this is being brought, in my opinion, there isn't a home or apartment building or anything in this community that we shouldn't be going after. Because if they put out bird feeders, they put out flagpoles, they put out anything on the house or garage, they're in violation.
I'm not disputing that.
I know you're not, and
we
that's
just
the thing
have-
that's scaring the hell out of me.
Right, we just haven't had those complaints. Could there be a Pandora's box with your current definition? Absolutely.
So, we're not going anywhere here with this right now. I'll tell you that. Everybody's kind of afraid to touch it, and I agree with you.
Well, I'm
It's
just shocked that you need a permit to put a flagpole in.
Yeah,
Because it's considered a structure.
So
Yes, it is.
the commission can think about it and then have it come back on a future agenda for consideration. So there's no requirement that the commission give direction tonight. Staff was really just bringing it forward to kind of point out the issues and see if the commission had any appetite for change. And if not, that's okay too.
Yeah, as Matt said, you know, this is on the agenda tonight because it is something that has recently come up that kind of the three of us have had to wrap our heads around, and the questions have come up, and it's like, well, let's at least get Plan Commission aware of the situation and start to see if there is an appetite, or do we need to have some longer discussions and some more thought and bring this back in the future. But at least now, Plan Commission is kind of aware of what's been going on, what we've been trying to figure out how to deal with.
I do find myself, you know, when Matt was echoing the fact that all of a sudden you start naming specific things, it's just it opens it up. All of a sudden you're talking garden trellises, we're talking ponds, we're talking so many different things. And where do you stop?
I'm just thinking of my neighborhood and who would be who would be in trouble based on, you know, yeah, it's a little mind-blowing, to be honest.
Well, let me ask you this. The most common thing that you're thinking that comes into your mind, and not to belabor the discussion, but is the most common thing you're thinking of, like the lawn ornament type of thing, the minor landscaping device? Is that what is concerning to commissioners, that would be considered a structure such that somebody could possibly need a permit for something that minor? Is that what your comment just now?
Yeah.
To put it another way, it's crazy that somebody should need a permit to put up a minor landscape device. Is that what
Right.
you're saying?
Right.
Well, if that's the main concern, there may be a way to craft a definition.
But at the same time, you start moving that around, then somebody could be like, well, that 67 Chevy with no wheels on it that I just stuck in my side yard as a decoration. It's a lawn.
I'm gonna put
It comes
It's true,
with-
we have a,
Like,
we have a
then you
separate
get-
code
then you get in
section.
that loophole.
potted,
We have a
I'm gonna
separate
put potted
code
flowers
section
in
for
this
vehicles.
burned out car. and
Yeah.
It's
call
not
it
a vehicle anymore,
decoration.
it's a lawn ornament now.
Well, then that's up to us to enforce, but I don't disagree that
Exhibit
it's,
that way.
it's problematic to start, because where do you stop, to trustee
Well-
Brody's point?
Exactly.
But at least you have it narrowed if we do want to pursue something. You have it narrowed to the broad group of what you're talking about. We're not talking about fences, we're talking about, or sheds. We're talking about lawn decorations, landscaping, semi-permanent to non-permanent
Right.
landscape devices.
I know, like in South Milwaukee, right, the whole thing with the giant skeletons right now, like the city ordered them to take it down, and I know a few houses in our community that have the giant skeletons up year round, and
Right?
I don't know, so yeah.
That's the structure.
Agreed.
I always look at those and go, where do you store those?
Outside, apparently.
Outside. You don't leave them up. You don't store them because you don't have anywhere to store them.
For way of examples of how other places have attacked this.
Thank you.
This is an example from my past, city of Oshkosh, where in their definition of structure, for example, they called out excluding landscape features. They chose fences, for better or worse. Public utilities and other minor site improvements. Now, the downside here is they don't actually then define what other minor site improvements are, so it's not, it still creates quite a bit of ambiguity on what that means. But just an example of attempt of what people have tried to do to address this situation, and there's no great way to address it.
Because that, in the current example, is a lean-to is the last verbiage there.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
So-
that's a catch-all,
Yeah, right.
yeah, so that's
which
that's not
I
a
don't
great
think
one.
anybody wants that sort of definition.
That is where, kind of as Attorney Glinch pointed out, like, it's tough to create exemptions even, because there's some unintended consequences no matter what way you look at it.
Exactly.
So I'll ask staff, should we as a commission think about this? Write down some ideas what we would like to see and then submit them to staff?
I would say, to Matt's points, I don't think we need it, there's no urgency to this issue.
Okay.
So I would say, put this on another agenda, future agenda under old business, and we can resume the discussion after the commissioners have had a chance to digest it. If you want to
Okay.
submit ideas to staff individually or collectively, that's, not collectively as a board, obviously, but
Right.
individually to us, we're more than welcome to take that. But I think just to put it on, start the topic tonight and continue it later.
Bob?
So can I ask you a question in regard to the specific example that they brought up, the lean-to and the comparison that, that was made while birdhouses and flagpoles? Where does that decision go? Does that come in front of us as far as that person, if that person wanted to make that argument, where does it go?
Well, it depends. So it depends on the type of permit that would be needed. And it depends on the zone that they're in, which also determines what type of permit they needed. They would either have relief in front of this body if they needed either some sort of determination or a conditional use grant to overrule a code section or an interpretation that staff has made, or they would need a variance from the Board of Zoning Appeals to say, staff has met and we've said this is our interpretation, this is how we're enforcing it. And they say, no, I disagree with that, I'm gonna take it to the Board of Zoning Appeals to get a variance. So they have relief
Okay, all right.
currently.
I would be embarrassed to take that argument in front of the board. And maybe maybe that's what they have to do. Maybe we don't change this. We have ways for them to appeal it.
True.
And, I mean, honestly, what we're talking about here is, and again, depending on the project or the code section, getting a permit. It may just be a building permit. It may just be a zoning permit.
Right.
We're not talking about everything has to
Right.
come in front of this board for a conditional use or a site plan or something like that. There's different tiers, as you all know, of permitting. So is it worth it to change and open up Pandora's box when in a lot of cases, a resident, yes, it is burdensome to get a building permit for a minor structure, but is it worth messing with your code?
To Attorney Galinski's point, one thing, the code does enumerate the difference between building and zoning permits. Sometimes the way this could be handled is you could issue a very simple, straightforward zoning permit, because you don't need a building permit for something. But if a situation comes up where you don't want to mess with structure, you could potentially handle it through a free zoning permit or a $5 zoning permit to at least keep the structural integrity of the ordinance there for the protections when you need it. So it's just kind of trying to think outside the box. What are maybe some ways we could handle it? Could you institute a process for a minor zoning permit that at least the integrity of the definition stays for when you need it, but does give away that when a situation absolutely comes up and you had to handle it, you could have something.
All right, is there any more comments or questions? Okay, well, let's move on. Citizen comments, everybody left. Item 8, adjournment.
Motion to adjourn, Rhodey?
Second, Belch?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
That's what you fixed
Opposed?
yesterday.
We are hereby adjourned. Thank you, everyone.